Long before the rise of Islam, the oasis of Yathrib, later known as Medina, was home to a significant Jewish community. These were not recent arrivals. Their presence stretched back centuries, perhaps even to the time of the Babylonian exile or the Roman-Jewish wars. Ancient stories tell of Jewish priests and scholars seeking refuge and a new beginning in the fertile lands of Arabia. They found in Yathrib a place where they could cultivate the land and live according to their ancient laws and traditions. The exact date of their first settlement is lost to history, shrouded in the mists of time, but their impact on the region was profound and lasting, shaping the very character of the oasis. These early Jewish settlers were pioneers in a challenging but rewarding environment. They brought with them advanced agricultural techniques, transforming arid patches into productive farms. They knew how to dig wells and create irrigation systems, essential skills in the desert landscape of Arabia. The oasis, with its date palms and springs, offered a sustainable life. The Jewish tribes established themselves in and around Yathrib, building homes and eventually fortified compounds to protect their communities and their livelihoods. Their diligence and expertise in farming helped make Yathrib a prominent agricultural center in the Hejaz region, attracting other settlers over time. Several distinct Jewish tribes became prominent in Yathrib. Among them, the Banu Kainuka, the Banu Nadir, and the Banu Quraiza were the largest and most influential. Each tribe often occupied a specific area of the oasis, maintaining its own leadership and social structures. They were not isolated, however. They interacted with the various Arab pagan tribes who also inhabited the region, forming a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and economic partnerships. These interactions were a part of daily life, sometimes peaceful and cooperative, at other times leading to friction and conflict, a common feature of tribal societies in pre-Islamic Arabia. The reasons for their migration to Arabia are varied in historical accounts. Some traditions suggest they fled persecution in the north, particularly after the Roman destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem in 70 CE. Others believe that some Jewish communities had been in Arabia for much longer, perhaps as traders who decided to settle. Regardless of their precise origins, these Jewish tribes carried with them a strong sense of identity, rooted in their monotheistic faith and their sacred scriptures. They saw themselves as guardians of a divine covenant, a people of the book living amidst a predominantly polytheistic Arab society, awaiting a prophesied messenger. The Jewish tribes of Yathrib were instrumental in developing the economic landscape of the oasis. Their expertise in agriculture was particularly noteworthy. They cultivated vast groves of date palms, which were a staple food and a key source of wealth in Arabia. And the dates of Medina became famous for their quality, and this was largely due to the skilled farming practices of the Jewish community. They also grew grapes, grains, and other crops, contributing to the food security and prosperity of the entire region. Their knowledge of irrigation and water management was crucial for survival and success in the desert environment. Beyond agriculture, the Jewish tribes excelled in various crafts and trades. The Banu Kainuka, for example, were renowned as skilled goldsmiths, jewelers, and blacksmiths. They crafted tools, weapons, and beautiful ornaments that were sought after by both Jewish and Arab inhabitants of Yathrib. This craftsmanship not only provided them with a good income, but also made them indispensable to the local economy. Other Jewish individuals engaged in commerce, facilitating trade routes that passed through or near Medina, connecting the oasis to wider networks of exchange across the Arabian Peninsula and beyond. Their economic activities were not just individual pursuits. They were often organized within the tribal structure. The tribes owned lands and resources collectively, and there was a system for distributing work and wealth. This communal approach helped them maintain their economic strength and social cohesion. They built markets where goods were exchanged, and these markets became important centers of interaction between different communities in Yathrib. The Jews of Medina were in many ways the economic backbone of the oasis, contributing significantly to its growth and stability before the arrival of Islam. This economic prowess naturally translated into a degree of social and political influence. The Jewish tribes possessed wealth, resources, and skills that were highly valued. They built strong forts, known as utum, which served as residences, storehouses, and defensive structures. These forts were a visible symbol of their established presence and their ability to protect their interests. Their economic success allowed them to form alliances with various Arab tribes, sometimes paying for protection or support, thus navigating the complex political landscape of pre-Islamic Arabia with skill and foresight. The Jewish communities of Yathrib were deeply committed to their religious and cultural heritage. They meticulously observed Jewish law, the halakha, which governed all aspects of their lives, from diet and worship to family matters and social interactions. The Sabbath was a sacred day of rest and prayer, and they celebrated the traditional Jewish festivals with devotion. Synagogues, known as Beit Midrash or houses of study, were central to their communal life. Here, they gathered for prayer, listened to readings from the Torah, and engaged in the study of their sacred texts. This dedication preserved their unique identity. Education was highly valued among the Jews of Medina. Rabbis and learned scholars played a crucial role in interpreting the scriptures and transmitting knowledge to the next generation. Children were taught to read Hebrew and to understand the teachings of the Torah. This emphasis on learning ensured the continuity of their traditions and provided the community with spiritual guidance. They spoke Arabic in their daily lives like their Arab neighbors, but Hebrew remained the sacred language of their prayers and scriptures. This bilingualism was a common feature of Jewish life in the diaspora. Socially, the Jewish tribes were organized around kinship and lineage. Each tribe had its own leaders and councils that managed internal affairs and represented the tribe in dealings with others. They lived in distinct quarters or fortified settlements, which provided security and helped maintain their communal bonds. While they had their own internal governance, they were also part of the broader social fabric of Yathrib. They interacted with Arab tribes, forming alliances, engaging in trade, and sometimes, inevitably, getting drawn into local disputes and conflicts that characterized the tribal politics of the era. Their monotheistic faith distinguished them from the predominantly polytheistic Arab tribes of Yathrib. The Jews believed in one God, the God of Abraham, Moses, and the prophets. They possessed written scriptures, the Torah, which they held in high esteem. This scriptural tradition and their monotheistic beliefs were known to their Arab neighbors. Indeed, some Arabs in Medina were influenced by Jewish ideas and were familiar with stories of prophets and divine revelation. This existing monotheistic presence would later play a role in the way the message of Islam was received in the city. The year 622 CE marked a pivotal moment in the history of Yathrib. Prophet Muhammad, facing persecution in his hometown of Mecca, migrated with his followers to the oasis. This event, known as the Hijra, not only transformed Yathrib into Medina, the city of the Prophet, but also profoundly impacted all its inhabitants, including the Jewish tribes. The prophet was invited to Medina by Arab tribes, seeking a mediator to end their long-standing internal feuds. His arrival heralded a new political and social order for the entire oasis. One of Prophet Muhammad's first significant actions in Medina was to establish a framework for peaceful coexistence among the diverse communities. This framework was formalized in a document known as the Sahifat al-Madina, or the Constitution of Medina. This remarkable charter outlined the rights and responsibilities of the Muslims, the Jewish tribes, and other Arab groups within a single community or ummah. It recognized the Jewish tribes as part of this wider community, granting them religious freedom and autonomy in their internal affairs, so long as they upheld their obligations to mutual defense and cooperation. The Constitution of Medina declared that the Jews of the Banu Auf and other allied Jewish groups were a community with the believers, Muslims. The Jews had their religion and the Muslims had theirs. This was a significant acknowledgement of religious pluralism. The charter stipulated that Jews and Muslims would support each other against any external threat to Medina. It aimed to create a unified front for the city, ensuring its security and stability. The Jewish tribes were expected to contribute financially to the defense of Medina, just like the Muslim members of the Ummah. Initially, the relationship between the nascent Muslim community and the established Jewish tribes appeared promising. The prophet engaged in dialogue with Jewish scholars, discussing matters of faith and scripture. There were shared monotheistic roots and common prophetic figures, such as Abraham and Moses, which provided a basis for understanding. Many early Muslims, and indeed the prophet himself, looked towards Jerusalem for prayer. The Constitution of Medina represented an attempt to build a harmonious, multi-religious society, a new experiment in community building in the Arabian Peninsula. Section 5. Whispers of Discord. Early interactions and growing tensions. Despite the initial framework of cooperation established by the Constitution of Medina, tensions gradually began to emerge between the growing Muslim community and some of the Jewish tribes. These tensions were complex, arising from a mixture of political, economic, and theological factors. As Prophet Muhammad's influence grew, the existing power dynamics within Medina started to shift. Some Jewish leaders may have felt their traditional status and autonomy were being challenged by the new order that was rapidly taking shape around the prophet and his followers. Theological discussions, which initially held the promise of mutual understanding, sometimes turned into debates and disagreements. Muslims believe Muhammad to be the final prophet in the Abrahamic tradition, a successor to Moses and Jesus. However, most Jewish scholars in Medina did not accept Muhammad's prophetic claims. They questioned his interpretations of Scripture and his authority. These religious differences, while not immediately causing open conflict, contributed to a growing sense of divergence and, in some instances, mistrust between the communities. Each side held firmly to its own beliefs and interpretations of God's will. Economic rivalries also played a part in the souring of relations. Some Jewish tribes, like the Banu Kainuka, were prominent in markets and crafts, and the arrival of Muslims, particularly the Meccan immigrants who were also skilled traders, may have introduced new competition. Furthermore, as the Muslim community consolidated its power, it began to assert more control over the economic resources of the oasis. Any perceived economic slights or disputes over resources could easily exacerbate existing political or religious frictions, leading to a more strained atmosphere within the diverse city. Moreover, the political landscape of Arabia was inherently unstable, characterized by shifting alliances and tribal loyalties. As Prophet Muhammad forged new alliances and engaged in conflicts with external enemies, particularly the Quraysh of Mecca, the Jewish tribes of Medina faced difficult choices. Their existing treaties and relationships with other Arab groups, including those hostile to the Muslims, sometimes placed them in precarious positions. Suspicions arose about where their ultimate loyalties lay, particularly during times of crisis or external threat to Medina, further straining the delicate balance established by the early charter. Section 6. The Unraveling Alliances, the Fate of Banu Qaynuqa and Banu Nadir. The first major open conflict between the Muslims and a Jewish tribe involved the Banu Qaynuqa, who were primarily goldsmiths and artisans. The specific incident that triggered the confrontation, according to Islamic historical sources, was a dispute in their marketplace that escalated. Following this, Prophet Muhammad laid siege to their fortified settlement in 624 CE, shortly after the Muslim victory at the Battle of Badr. The Banu Qaynuqa, after a siege lasting about 2 weeks, eventually surrendered. They were expelled from Medina, allowed to take their movable possessions, but forced to leave their lands and homes behind. This expulsion sent a clear message about the changing power dynamics in Medina. The specific reasons cited in historical accounts often point to alleged breaches of the Constitution of Medina by the Banu Qaynuqa, though interpretations vary. Some scholars suggest that their perceived alliance with Meccan interests or a refusal to fully integrate into the new Medinan order under Muhammad's leadership contributed to their downfall. Their departure marked a significant reduction in the Jewish presence and economic influence within the city, consolidating Muslim authority further. A year later, in 625 CE, another prominent Jewish tribe, the Banu Nadir, faced a similar fate. Tensions had been building, with accusations that the Banu Nadir were plotting against Prophet Muhammad. Following an alleged assassination attempt, or due to their perceived collaboration with the Meccans after the Muslim setback at the Battle of Uhud, the Prophet ordered them to leave Medina. The Banu Nadir initially resisted, fortifying themselves in their strongholds. However, after a siege of several days, they too capitulated and were exiled from the city, many of them relocating to the Jewish oasis of Khaybar, north of Medina. The expulsion of the Banu Nadir further weakened the collective strength of the Jewish community in Medina. Their lands and properties, particularly their rich date palm groves, were confiscated and distributed among the early Muslim emigrants from Mecca, who had arrived in Medina with few possessions. These events demonstrate a clear pattern. As Prophet Muhammad's political and military power grew, the terms of coexistence outlined in the Constitution of Medina were reinterpreted or superseded by actions taken in response to perceived threats or breaches of loyalty, leading to a dramatic shift in the demographic and political landscape of the oasis. Section 7. The Tragic Culmination. The Siege of Banu Qurayza. The most tragic and controversial episode involving the Jewish tribes of Medina was the fate of the Banu Qurayza in 627 CE. This occurred in the aftermath of the Battle of the Trench, also known as the Battle of Khandak. where a large Confederate army of Meccans and allied tribes besieged Medina. During this critical siege, Islamic historical sources accuse the Banu Qurayza, the last major Jewish tribe remaining within Medina, of treachery. They were alleged to have colluded with the besieging enemy, thereby violating their treaty obligations to defend the city alongside the Muslims. After the Confederate forces withdrew and the siege of Medina failed, Prophet Muhammad turned his attention to the Banu Qurayza. The Muslims besieged the Banu Qurayza's stronghold for nearly a month. Faced with dwindling supplies and no hope of outside help, the tribe eventually surrendered. They agreed to accept the judgment of Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, a leader of the Arab AWS tribe, who had been their ally before the advent of Islam. Sa'd, who was dying from a wound sustained during the Battle of the Trench, delivered a harsh verdict based, according to some accounts, on their own scriptural laws for treason. The judgment was that all the adult men of the Banu Qurayza were to be executed and their women and children enslaved. Their properties and possessions were to be divided among the Muslims. This verdict was carried out. The number of men executed is reported in historical sources to be several hundred. This event marked the effective end of a strong, autonomous Jewish presence within the city of Medina itself. It remains a deeply troubling and debated event in history, with varying interpretations regarding the justifications, the process, and the scale of the outcome. The fate of the Banu Qurayza sent shockwaves through Arabia and has been a subject of intense discussion and reflection ever since. For the early Muslim community, it was seen as a necessary action against treason that threatened the very survival of their nascent state during a time of war. For others, it represents a tragic loss of life and the brutal realities of power and conflict in that era. Understanding this event requires grappling with the complexities of tribal warfare, treaty obligations, and the severe consequences of perceived betrayal in a society constantly under threat. Section 8. A Transformed Landscape. The shifting status of Medina's Jews. Following the expulsion of the Banu Qaynuqa and Banu Nadir and the tragic end of the Banu Qurayza, the Jewish presence within the city of Medina was drastically altered. From being influential tribes with significant economic power and autonomous social structures, the organized Jewish community in Medina effectively ceased to exist. The fortresses that once symbolized their strength were now empty or occupied by others. The agricultural lands they had cultivated for generations passed into new hands, primarily those of the Muslims, which helped to solidify the economic base of the emerging Islamic State. While the major Jewish tribes were eliminated from Medina, it is possible that some individual Jews, perhaps those not directly affiliated with the main tribes or those who converted, may have remained. However, they no longer held any collective political or social power. The center of Jewish life in the Hejaz region shifted to other oases, most notably Khaybar, about 150 kilometers north of Medina, where the Banu Nadir had sought refuge. Khaybar itself would later come into conflict with the expanding Muslim state, leading to its conquest in 628 CE, though its Jewish inhabitants were initially allowed to stay on their lands as tribute-paying cultivators. The change in status was profound. Before the Hijra, Jewish tribes were key players in the socio-economic and political life of Yathrib. The Constitution of Medina had initially recognized them as part of a larger community with specific rights and protections, However, the subsequent conflicts and expulsions demonstrated a clear shift. Ultimate authority now rested with Prophet Muhammad and the Muslim leadership. The vision of a pluralistic ummah encompassing autonomous Jewish tribes as perhaps envisioned in the early days did not endure in Medina itself in the face of escalating conflict and political consolidation. This transformation of Medina from a multi-tribal oasis with a strong Jewish presence into the capital of a rapidly growing Islamic state was a swift and dramatic process. The departure of the Jewish tribes reshaped not only the demography and economy of the city, but also its cultural and religious landscape. The narrative surrounding these events became foundational stories within Islamic tradition, explaining the consolidation of Muslim power and the relationship between the early Muslim community and other groups, particularly the people of the book. Section 9, Echoes in the Sands, the enduring legacy of Medina's Jewish past. Though the organized Jewish community of Medina was dispersed in the 7th century, their centuries-long presence left indelible marks, some more tangible than others. The memory of these tribes, their contributions, and their conflicts with the early Muslims is preserved extensively in Islamic historical and religious texts. Sirah, or biographies of the Prophet, and Hadith literature recount numerous interactions, treaties, and disputes involving the Banu Qaynuqa, Banu Nadir, and Banu Qurayza. These accounts have shaped Muslim understanding of their own early history and interfaith relations for centuries. Archaeologically, direct physical traces of the Jewish settlements in Medina, such as specific synagogues or easily identifiable fortresses, are not prominently visible today, often built over by centuries of development. However, the names of certain locations, wells, or agricultural areas in and around Medina sometimes echo historical associations with these ancient tribes. The rich date palm cultivation, a skill heavily associated with the early Jewish inhabitants, continues to be a hallmark of Medina. The very landscape of the oasis was in part shaped by their labor and ingenuity over many generations. One of the most significant, albeit indirect, legacies can be seen in the early development of Islamic thought and practice. The presence of established monotheistic communities with sacred scriptures in Arabia, including the Jews of Medina, provided a context for the emergence of Islam. Concepts such as prophecy, divine revelation, scripture, and certain legal and ethical principles found resonance. The Quran itself engages extensively with biblical narratives and figures central to Jewish tradition, reflecting an environment of religious interaction and debate during Islam's formative period. Today, the story of the Jews of Medina serves as a powerful reminder of the complex and often painful dynamics of history, particularly concerning interfaith encounters and the formation of new religious and political orders. It highlights a period of coexistence and cooperation, followed by tension, conflict, and displacement. Reflecting on this history encourages a deeper understanding of the shared roots and subsequent divergences of Judaism and Islam, and the enduring human quest for community, faith, and security in a world of constant change. The silence of their once vibrant presence in Medina is itself a poignant legacy.
If you've enjoyed this program, please click like and subscribe.